Welcome to the Mindful Millennial Podcast, where host Seth Marcus dissects and discusses all things impacting the millennial mind. Mentors, peers, and professionals share intimate conversations on subjects such as entrepreneurship, exercise and health, the blessings and curses of technology, travel, and how to navigate adulthood in this age of information. We're the largest generation in history, and we dictate the future. The Mindful Millennial finds a signal through the noise.
Hey everyone, welcome to the MindMill Podcast. Today's episode is a special one for me. Not only is it special because of the subjects discussed, but also because this episode is with the guest from my first ever MindMill podcast, Jake Holschuh. Jake has been a friend, photography teacher, and colleague of mine for the last few years. He is a stellar videographer and photographer, and was a huge inspiration for me starting this podcast, as well as my recent MindMill Abroad photography project through Europe. Him and I touch on our story a bit in this episode, and I reluctantly recommend you to go back and listen to my first episode. It's cringeworthy at times, but a great way to learn a bit more about Jake and our friendship. Jake recently purchased his first home here in Denver, Colorado, and he had asked me to share some insight and advice for new homeowners, roommates, and landlords. I asked him if we could make a podcast out of it, and today's episode was born. Set in Jake's brand new backyard, him and I start with some questions and discussion on homeownership, being your own handyman, selecting and living with roommates, budgeting, and coexisting. After a short break, we flip the script and switch topics to professional photography, how it's changed, where it's heading, and how to succeed as an artist in a world of camera phones and social media. I love this project. The MindMill has evolved and grown in ways I never imagined when Jake and I recorded the first episode. There's amazing new episodes coming up, as well as some exciting new announcements at the MindMill. But now, please enjoy my spirited and periodically snarky conversation with Jake Holschuh.
No comment to start off.
That is how I started my first ever podcast with Jake, and that is how I'll start this next podcast with Jake. I am with my good friend Jake Holschuh, and we are in his backyard. It's funny because I just today, as we're recording this, released the fireside at Yellowstone with my friend Greg, and today I'm recording semi-fireside in Jake's backyard right next to
a little more city-esque, I would say, than Yellowstone.
A little more contained of a fire.
Yeah, fire pit.
Well, Jake hit me up a couple days ago and had some questions for me, and I always have questions for Jake. We'll get into the reasons why, but I decided maybe it'd be worth it to take a stab at recording this whole thing, and it might be useful to other people who are interested in these subjects. So Jake had asked me some questions about being a homeowner, as he just purchased his own home, as well as a landlord/roommate, and getting through the interpersonal issues, the responsibilities of roommates versus landlords, all that sort of stuff. And I figured that's pretty universal, whether you're a homeowner or renting, sharing rooms, whatever. It's something that comes up a lot. And so I wanted to address some of that, and then we might flip the script, and I wanted to ask Jake continuing questions on video and photography, because he has been my teacher since the very beginning. You want to start with the photography or the homeowners?
Homeownership.
All right, man, then you're up.
Well, I just purchased my first home. I'm just turned 27 years old. I'm a freelance photographer here in Denver, Colorado. It was quite a stressful experience overall getting my home. It took me about 6 to 8 months, I think, of just searching around, getting my loan figured out. Being a freelancer as well made it a little more difficult.
Because you're all self-reported income, basically?
Yeah, and I'd only had a couple years of owning my business when I started to apply for the loan, which they have to average out your 2 years. And that first year, I wasn't necessarily working full-time as a freelancer. So my average monthly income looked way lower than it actually was, which kind of screwed me in getting a loan. And pretty much ended up having to have my parents come on to help co-sign just so their income would help me get a bigger loan.
Right.
Because here in Denver, I qualified for $300,000 and pretty much needed to get up to $350,000 to be able to really even purchase a home.
Just to look in the market.
Worth purchasing. My main, really, I guess, want in the home was a couple years ago. I started my business, like I was saying. A couple years ago, I decided I kind of wanted to stay in Denver for the long term. After college, I wasn't exactly sure if I wanted to stay here or go somewhere new just to try things out, and decided I loved Denver, started my business here, and worked hard to get it to where it was, and just felt like it wasn't worth necessarily leaving
trying to start
anytime
fresh
in
in
the
another
next
market.
5 to 10 years, really, because I'm building something here that I love and care about. So,
And it's phenomenal.
Thank you. I decided to stay, and rent here is crazy. I'm fortunate enough that throughout my life, I've had savings from my grandfather that I got when I was in high school that helped me get through college and also helped me put a down payment on this home, which I know a lot of people don't have that luxury. They have student loans, and even not having student loans helped me exponentially in terms of my career and not having that hanging over my head while trying to start my business and not have a lot of income during those first few months. So started looking about, I guess, 10 months ago, originally under the $300,000, and eventually got it up to $350,000 right before I ended up purchasing my home, and ended up kind of buying in a area that's not terrible, but also it has a lot of good qualities as well. It's centrally located. I'm still in Denver rather than a surrounding city.
You're super close to like my favorite neighborhood.
Yeah.
Only 5 minutes away from like the Wash Park area, but
yeah, I guess like I fell in love with the style of the house as well as, I mean, the yard we're sitting in right now, which is about a half acre is my lot, and you just...
It's enormous, man. It's like the biggest yard in all of Denver.
Yeah, out of the 60 to 70 places I ended up checking out over those 8 months, this was by far maybe even double the size lot of any other place. So that was a huge selling point for me, just feeling like I have my own little sanctuary back here where I can landscape and work out here and have a dog eventually that I can let run
set up
around
your space
out here.
for all your, like, the studio area that I know you're working on is going to be awesome, just to not have to tear everything down, set it back up, and be mobile all the time.
Yep.
Being a photographer, that's so much more than the 2 microphones and the recorder that I get to use.
Yeah, you need height, you need length, you need width, white walls,
everything.
Yeah.
So you're here, man. You made it.
Yeah, I made it. It's been really nice since moving in. It's been a shit ton of work.
Always welcome.
Yep. As we speak, I'm looking at the plumbers changing out my water pipes.
And they will be probably supplying the backing track to this podcast
as
we record.
Little curse words here and there. But everything's been really nice since moving in. My main thing with getting the house too was trying to get out of that cycle of paying rent, as well as putting money into something over the long term that is going to come back to me and not just disappear like paying rent to a landlord. And
the concept of having long-term investment is very hard to not only comprehend, but also to execute on when you're a young adult. It's so important to start early, but it seems you're just getting used to making money, much less spending money in a way that will support you throughout your whole lifetime. So it's definitely a huge step, and I'm not a parent, although I have a close relationship with my little cousins. To me, being a homeowner, it must feel a lot like being a parent, starting by being pregnant and being like, I don't know what the hell's going on. What do I do now? Do I go see a doctor? Do I go see a doula, a midwife? There's so many questions. There's so much you have to figure out. And then you finally feel like you're kind of getting the hang of it. And then you have your baby, which is buying your house. And all of a sudden it's like, now I'm a parent. Now I'm a homeowner. Now I have a whole nother world of things I don't know anything about.
The timeline was pretty dead on too, with the 8 to 9 months looking for the house. And it's very similar. The whole time you're just like, what am I looking for? What do I need?
Yeah.
Like, what am I going to have to do?
Twists and turns, dramas.
What's the most important things? What are the least important? And I guess during that period of looking, you're always wondering, like, should I actually put a bid here? Especially in this market, because I would check out a place and within it being on the market in 10 minutes, there's 10 families there to look at it, and 3 or 4 are going to put down a bid.
It's cutthroat, man.
Day of it going on the market. So
it's crazy right now.
You have to decide very quickly what you're willing to deal with, what you want in a house. And that was probably the biggest struggle, was being like, growing up in Cincinnati. Me and Seth both grew up in Cincinnati. My brother was looking for a home kind of at the same time, and the market was just insane. Like, you could buy a mansion in Cincinnati for half of what I got 3-bedroom, 1-bath here for. It's
right next to the Target.
Yeah, exactly. So that whole process was intimidating for sure, dealing with the quickness of it all. And
being a first-time buyer in such a competitive market, you just feel like a fish out of water, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I actually learned a lot from you in the last, feels like closer to a year, but just learning from you the infinite challenges of applying for loans, competing in the market, getting a bid down, getting under contract, the appraisals, all the different steps to going into being an official homeowner, because I was so fortunate to have an opportunity to do an owner carry where the owner directly sold to me and I didn't have to compete for my home, which was
Nice.
obviously just probably one of the most lucky things I'll ever experience in my life, because I not only you but my cousin in Maryland had just as much trouble finding. It's just about finding the right place.
Yeah.
It's such a huge investment, and it totally uproots your life or the life of you and your family, and it's a huge deal, really. It's kind of like the first huge deal for a lot of people. So I commend you, man. And we just did the housewarming party a couple of weeks ago,
It's a blast.
and now we're on to new challenges. So what do you got for me, man? What do you need of my wisdom?
What do I need of your wisdom?
Keep in mind,
I
we're
did
on
it too
air.
much, so
We're on air, so you can't talk as much shit as you'd like to. I know. I'm gonna just lob it up there.
I think one of the biggest worries I had was the roommate situation, because part of the whole goal was to get a 3-bedroom, rent out those 2 rooms to pay for my mortgage, so I wasn't paying anything every month towards my home.
Yeah.
And ended up working out pretty quickly, and ended up getting 2 people in that I'm actually pretty close with and feel confident in, that they'll pull their weight around the house in terms of chores and things like that.
Yeah.
And I know you haven't had as much luck necessarily.
I'm in a great place now.
Yeah, you're in a great place now.
It was there were growing pains.
Yeah, growing pains through that process.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would like to know, because as time goes on, somebody doesn't vacuum for 2 months. Somebody doesn't.
The cracks in the pavement
starts getting
start
a little
to
lazy.
grow a bit.
Yeah.
It
And,
happens.
my roommate's got a chow, so
Mm-hmm.
thing's huge and sheds like crazy. And
Right.
I'm already sweeping and mopping.
And we have a
little
black
more,
lab
and-
that is also a roommate. That it's always a struggle keeping the house up to a good clean
I
standard.
think too, once I get a puppy, I won't feel as bad mopping and sweeping all the time, because I'll be like, oh well, he's doing it too.
Yeah.
I don't mind cleaning, but yeah, like I said, I'm just curious in terms of like those growing pains and what you have found throughout the first year having somebody in your home, and like I think as time goes on, those relationships can stress a little bit. Owning the home and seeing the wear and tear, you kind of get a little stressed. You're like, oh, I'm gonna have to fix that. I have to fix this. In terms of that relationship, how do you keep it going in a positive direction? I mean, do you guys have like weekly dinners together? As cheesy and weird as that sounds,
Sure.
I mean, do you guys like really try to socialize in a different way than you would if you were just a roommate and not their landlord, I guess?
It's a good question. There's never a clear-cut answer to those things, because you're living with other perfectly imperfect people. Everybody's got good days and bad days. They've got amazing strengths and some critical weaknesses. It's just being human. But I think that above all else, you have to maintain like just a sense of love. I know that you were saying, you may sound cheesy, but it's absolutely true. Like, you've got to realize that these are other people that are just trying to live their life too. And you can go the route of super organization. That seems to be how I like to move about it, keeping calendars, writing things down in lists and stuff. And that's just how I operate my own life. That's how I can remember all the things that go on in the house. So I keep my fingers crossed and try to lead by example, that other people will honor that too. We agree on a schedule, and it's on mutually shared Google Calendar or on a physical calendar, and people take care of their own. The differences between being just a roommate, having like a landlord-roommate situation, it's testy, because there's naturally rent is a hard issue, because it's a huge portion of people's income. People spend a lot of money on where they live, and that's just how it is. So when everyone's spending the same amount of money and paying a landlord, the playing field is level, which means that hopefully everyone can agree, but everyone's peers. So if you're like, hey man, like, clean up the dishes, or you broke this cabinet, like, I expect you to fix it, it's pretty easy to be like, nah. You know what I mean? Like that. So when you are the landlord, now there's a different dynamic, right? Where there can be resentment on both sides. You have to accept the fact that you will always care about this house more than your tenants, no matter what, because that's just the way it is. Despite how amazing the people are or how much care they take of your home, obviously you want your roommates to be respectful people, and I've only known them a little bit, but yours definitely seem that way. This is your business. This is your entity, and they're paying to support that. And there will be a bit of like, I'm paying you sort of attitude at certain times. So you have to be ready for that, and just remember that these people are other loving humans that want to feel comfortable in their own home. And I'm a huge fan of team exercises, not like trust falls or anything like that.
That sounds fun too, though.
But no, like last week was kind of the beginning of fall, and we had just closed down the pool in the backyard. So I threw out there on the schedule about a week and a half beforehand. I was like, guys, pool's closing. Why don't we schedule out a Saturday, big fall clean out? We clean up the whole backyard, get all the stuff that we were using around the pool stashed and put away, clean out the gutters. We sweep up things. We kind of clean windows, things that just don't happen.
Touched usually.
Right,
yeah.
you know? And it worked out great. On a day like that, we simply cooked a big breakfast together. We had a little powwow, talked about how things were going, kept it loose, and then took on some assignments and been like, okay, so I'm going to take care of this, and that. And my other roommate's going to do this, and we're just going to turn up some loud music, and we're just going to go for it. We spent about like 2.5, 3 hours all together, and when we were done, the house was immaculate, and everybody was in a good mood. No one felt like they were being taken advantage of or anything like that. So
that's always the biggest fear
goal.
with me, too, is becoming the asshole. I want them to still think I'm their friend. Like, I don't want them to view me as a landlord. And I almost feel like a little bit of uncomfortableness, I guess, in accepting their money, even though
Totally.
I shouldn't. I paid my fair due, but it's difficult to find that balance in that relationship with people who have been friends and are now not only your friends, but also people that are helping you pay your mortgage.
Right. It's not exactly like a employee-employer sort of situation. It's almost like, in some ways, you're their employee, and in other ways, they're your employee. You know what I mean? Like, there's money being exchanged. It's paying for a service and paying for a product, and there is that cut and dry side of it, but there's also the dynamics of living with friends. So I wanted to break it down a little bit to you. I know I've said this to you before, but the golden rule of roommates is good roommates can make great friends, but good friends can make terrible roommates.
Yeah, and
so,
I've experienced that over and over again throughout. And that's another interesting thing, is that I've always been the one to clean more than my other roommates. At least I feel that way. They might not feel that way. But I've always felt that I've mainly been the caretaker of most of the households I've lived in, and I've lived in 9 different places in 8 years in Colorado.
Gee, I didn't know that.
So, it's been one place after another every year, and then bouncing around some summers too. So
God, just your history, man, makes me feel so freaking grateful. I've lived in my family's house for 6 months, then moved across the street to a perfect rental that just happened to open up, and then I had an amazing opportunity to move into this house. I've been extremely blessed in that realm.
So over those 9 different places I've lived in Colorado in 8 years, like I said, I've always felt like I've been the one to take care of the home and things like that. And I've always lived with friends. I've never really lived with strangers, maybe people I didn't know as well. But I'm pretty used to that situation of living with friends. Like you said, it doesn't always work out, and I have seen horror situations. But I think I've learned over these 8 years about how to choose which friends you would live better with.
Totally.
And I settled on a few things, and it was cleanliness, huge for me, because I need a clean space to live in and work in, especially being a freelancer and working from home. If I see something that needs clean, I'm going to clean it, and it takes me away from my
I 100% agree.
daily jobs.
You have to clean, you have to like set your workspace, otherwise you're mentally distracted the whole time.
Yeah, and obviously along the same lines, you want to like a lot of the same things your roommates like and have common interests. Andrew, who moved in recently, is an amazing abstract painter, and I went to school with him. One of those people I never hung out with too much outside of class, but we were always in classes and would hang out all the time in school.
Yeah.
So, and I was really comfortable with him, trustworthy dude, quiet, chill, likes to do his own thing. And
that's always a good characteristic, is someone who respects their own time and space.
Also a dude I've never seen scream or get upset, really, which is amazing. Who knows what that really means? But Andrew, if you're listening. And then Jack, I actually lived with Jack at the place I lived before I bought the home. So it was easy to kind of get him to come along because we were on a month-to-month. And this place is much better than the basement apartment we had been living in.
The dungeon.
Jack and I get along great. We've been good friends actually for a long time. And a lot of this situation he was experiencing in his old home are the same situations that I don't want to experience living with roommates. So he had a lot of the same feelings I did in terms of what he wanted in a home And also he's finishing up school as a graphic designer, amazing artist as well. So, I mean, it's 2 other artists, not crazy, drunk, alcoholic artists, but awesome, cool artists that are hard workers and do their thing. So it's been great having those 2 here, and I've been
knock on wood, man.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to have those guys here, and hopefully they stay a while.
Well, man, you've been through such a huge hassle with different roommates, cleanliness options, and then the home buy, and you're here. You've got 2 awesome roommates here, so I can only keep my fingers crossed that you picked 2 winners and that everything seems good. But the only constant in this world is change.
Yeah.
So, like, it may be good right now. It may get better. It may start to get worse. But what this is right now, Jake, and what I found out quickly as I kind of jumped right into becoming a landlord, is you're now a leader. Not to say that you haven't taken leadership roles before, but, like, this is a pretty official role as a leader. I like seeing it that way a bit more than being like an employer or the landlord.
Thank you for boosting my ego.
Or something like that. You know what I mean? Well, there's nothing I hate more than boosting your ego.
You just did it, bud. On top of the world right now.
It's something that, like, you really start to learn to work with other people. And for me, I've had to accept the fact that you can lead by explanation or you can lead by example. And the golden rules that I've come up with just in, I guess, almost 3 years or so of being a roommate or a landlord at this point is lead by example with the cleanliness, with respecting people's privacy, and also sharing the space. Understanding that if someone seems to really have been really working really hard and wants to just chill out, maybe they want their time to themselves. You don't argue them on, like, what to watch that night. Let it be their pick.
It's been really nice.
Be gracious. You know what I mean? I've found that has always helped. It's also very difficult as a landlord. The challenge that I find is that people work so hard that they associate work time as when they leave and go to the office or when a client is paying them for billable hours. And then when they're off, they're off. And as a landlord, your tenants' off time is when you need them to contribute to the house dynamics, which can be naturally kind of tricky. If you're working 40 to 60 hours a week and your landlord's like, how about we work all day Saturday, that can easily go...
set somebody off.
Yeah, that can easily go wrong. There's an aspect of leading by example and communicating clearly. And one of the things that has helped me a lot, just in life in general, has been when something goes down, a dog pukes in the house, or someone's not changing over their laundry, or people aren't doing what they said they're going to do, or whatever the little thing is.
You leave a passive-aggressive sticky note on the door.
Yeah, just got to put the sticky notes. You go, like, pee on their pillow and turn it over. And
You're listening to this, Adam, Jordan, Billy?
Billy, I'm looking at you. So, no. To me, there's a process. It's like, okay, something happened. Your roommate didn't take the trash out, and we missed trash day or something like that. Now we've got this surplus, and it's going to take weeks for us to get rid of all of this recycling or whatever. Take a second and chill out. The last thing you want to do is fire off that angry text or storm back into the house and start something right then because you're just charged. It's not going to help the matter if you're angry about it. Take a second and let that initial emotion subside. But here's the catch. As soon as you don't feel as angry about it, there's now a timer counting down against you as to when you should communicate it. If you get over your anger but still feel like you need to communicate, you have to communicate as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it starts to linger and it starts to build this more like long-term resentment sort of dynamic, which is probably more unhealthy than being more explosive and losing your temper quickly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
That's helped me a ton, is like when some shit hits the fan, I'll go somewhere else, check myself, and when I feel more calm, then I know that it's like top priority for me to go talk to this person with a clear head. So it's like speaking out of truth and love, right?
Yeah.
Because you could be as angry as you want, but then...
You can apply that to a lot of different areas.
Absolutely. But 10 minutes after your explosive outrage on someone not bringing out the recycling, you still have to live with them. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So that has helped me just in life in general, but especially in the roommate situation.
So I've got a few broad questions for you, just
Sure.
out of curiosity.
Shoot.
Question number 1, biggest reward of being a homeowner.
Sure.
Question number 2, biggest disappointment in being a homeowner.
All right.
Question number 3, what's your biggest unexpected expense you've had being a homeowner?
I'll try to backpedal and get them all answered for you. So the biggest blessing of being a homeowner is absolutely cultivating an area for people to not only survive in, but also to thrive in. From the very beginning, I've wanted my house to be a place where people come to relax, to connect with each other, to lean on each other when needed, and also to build their lives. I know that nothing is permanent, and it's kind of like if I'm facilitating a habitat that people are comfortable and building and becoming more abundant humans, eventually they're going to move on to something better. And that's awesome. It'll be sad, but it'll also be a happy moment that one of my roommates, one of my good friends is moving up in the world. And I'm happy that I could have been a part of that. That's probably the biggest blessing. Financially, it is very rewarding to get on the other side of the rent game. That's just kind of what you know. That's the expected switch. Mm-hmm. The more unexpected stuff is kind of realizing this isn't just a building that you and your buddies kind of throw your stuff into and party on the weekends when you're young. This is, you're looking around, it's this is the home that I create. It's as fun as we want it to be. It's as creative as we want it to be. It's as artistic as we want it to be. You're painting, and that's cool. The disappointments, I think the disappointments and the most costly are tied in a bit. There's a level of fear that goes with homeowning when you're just you feel like you're doing great in business, but you don't want to necessarily splurge on that vacation or that trip or that new car or whatever the expense coming up is, because in the back of your mind, you could be in Colorado, you're one hailstorm away from
a new roof,
a $20,000 roof, or having a pool. It's just a freaking money suck in itself. And there's an established budget that's going to be continuously drawing on your account. And then there's the inevitable big ticket item that's going to come down the road too. Just today, I had to get my pipe scaled, which I had no idea was even a thing. But
scaling of the pipe.
I'm eagerly looking forward to that invoice in my email. So as a homeowner, you don't know what you don't know. Eventually something's going to happen, and it'll be as easy or as minor as the electricity in the kitchen isn't working, and you realize that there's something wrong with your panel, and then that turns into a wiring issue, and before you know it, you could just have to go flip the switch on the breaker, or it could be $700 rerouting of cables. You just start losing touch of it. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily the biggest disappointment. I think the biggest disappointment when I think back on it is also has to do with the personnel. Is, like you said earlier, without going into too many stories, I had some horror stories with some of the people I've met. And that goes back to this golden rule that I live by now, which the two worst roommates I've had, and I think I've had about 8 or 9 at this point, the two worst ones were both people that I thought I had so much in common with, to the point where I picked them for emotional reasons rather than logistical reasons. Mm-hmm. They were both musicians, and they were both...
don't live with a musician.
Well, I'm not saying don't live with a musician, because now I do live with a musician, and I love him to death. We're having a great time together. I'm not trying to typecast anyone. I'm a musician. But
I would never live with you.
You wish you could live with me. You asked to live with me at one point.
Rent was way too high.
But it goes back to, you got to pick roommates off of criteria. You've had enough living situations that you've kind of formulated your own characteristics of what you want to see in a roommate. And now that you get to pick the roommates, that's great that you can curate who lives in your house. Mm-hmm. For me, I didn't have as many experiences, so I had to learn kind of on my feet. And I did that basically through Craigslist. I decided to use that as my platform for reaching out for potential roommates. But over the experiences,
what was the creepiest inquiry you got?
There's just so much.
Can I have a sex dungeon in your basement? Was that ever a question that came up?
Yeah, I've got a full U-Haul of sex toys and apparatus that we need to.
You have a shed?
Yeah. I basically, over the process, I started developing a stronger and stronger post, better photos, really descript information about the house, about who I am, what I'm looking for, and then most importantly, a prompt. And I already thought about it when I was preparing for this episode. I'll include those kind of details in the show notes for people who are interested in seeing what that actually looks like, because I did find it to be incredibly helpful, not only because it made me feel like I was expressing myself to a potential roommate in the best way possible, but I also left an ask. At the end of the post, I said, if you're interested, please respond to me with just a little bit about yourself, if you have any pets, if you have any significant others, how much stuff you're planning on moving, your availability to move in, like little things that you think that a good roommate would not only have the answer to, but also feel inclined to after seeing what you've after you've given so much thought in there, they could give a fraction of it and give you a meaningful answer. So that was the first line of defense, especially after the first few times trying this. Like if people just sent me an email or whatever, like, hey man, I'm interested, why don't you text me? I wouldn't even go down that road. I put so much work into it. If they won't even reciprocate with 5 minutes of concentrated thought to tell me that they have a dog and a girlfriend that's moving here in 6 months or whatever, then like it's just asking for problems on the line. Yep. So that was the first line of defense. After a few emails back and forth, and you can really tell a lot by how someone composes themselves on an email, then I would get on a phone call, and finally the last step, after a good phone call, you're like, okay, this person seems to have a good head on their shoulders, and you invite them over for the walkthrough. I sometimes like to do a dinner, either like a lunch or a dinner with them, simply to see how they conduct themselves in the kitchen. Because how a roommate conducts himself in the kitchen is how they'll treat your house. It's the truth. Fair. It happened a couple of times where I met this guy and they were really cool, and you ask them, like, how clean are you? Most people who are trying to live in your house are going to be like, oh yeah, man, I clean up after myself. But there's a difference between cleaning up after yourself and cleaning because something needs to be cleaned. Yeah. It's like, it's one thing to put your dish in the dishwasher. It's another thing to take out the trash, clean up the stove, sweep up the floors, these things that kind of everybody contributes to, but a lot of people like to never take ownership of, right? So by having a meal with them, you kind of get to know what they're really like and what it's like to spend more than just like an initial walkthrough time with them, and also see how they conduct themselves during and after dinner. I'm not expecting someone to like bust my tables, but if someone's like, hey, what can I do?
Did you leave your trash full?
Yeah. Say what?
They would take it. Did you purposefully leave your trash full?
Yeah, all sorts of little traps, pitfalls, because that's what I want. I want them to fail. I want to spend all this time vetting roommates so that they'll fail right at the last step. That was kind of my process. And I think that is my long-winded version of answering your 3 questions. You got some other things for me?
Did you answer what the biggest expense was?
The biggest expense?
Pool, maybe.
Well, the pool is a seasonal thing. God, I can't imagine. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about putting like a donation bucket out there, but I just know it would never get anywhere. I would get so much flack for it, and maybe
You'd
$5
get
a season.
Everything besides dollar bills.
dirty toilet paper, some hate mail.
Sticky notes, passive-aggressive sticky notes.
Passive-aggressive sticky notes. Man, that is a good question. I've got this Walter White-style water heater in my house. I say that because in one of the episodes, he kind of like decided to splurge some of his drug money on this like really fancy tankless water heater. And as soon as I saw it in the house, I immediately just thought of Breaking Bad. So like, I always call it my Walter White water heater. That thing, like, if one valve breaks, it's like $300. Jeez. It's just like, and it, like I said,
it's a new piece of equipment.
Not necessarily. It's built to last. It's a really nice piece of equipment, but with nice equipment, just like your photo gear, something inside breaks, it's expensive. So that water heater, and now that I have 4 people living in the house, that's 4 showers, 4 loads of laundry, dishes. That water heater's, it's got quite a toll on it at this point. So that has proven to be a pretty big expense. Other than that, I've been very blessed to not have any like catastrophic issues with the house so far. And I'm going to knock on wood. I feel like this should just be like the knock on wood episode. Yeah, we're talking about homeownership.
Even in the process of buying a house, people tell you more so all the terrible things you're going to experience than like any of the good things. Typically, they're like, oh yeah, make sure you get a home warranty. Make sure you that water heater is new. It's on and on and on of hearing people's horror stories about having homes. It's like, you're so excited to get a house, and then people just tell you how shitty it is.
Well, but
honestly,
you have to be cautiously optimistic, right?
Yeah.
You have to plan for the worst.
Exactly.
But you have to keep your headspace present.
Well, part of the reason I'm getting the plumbing done right now, it's like I knew down the line that was needed to get done, and might as well do it now while I just moved in and
find like 3 inches of water.
Exactly.
One day,
And plus, cleaner drinking water. Pour
right on. So it's easy to spend your time in anxiety and worried about what's going to happen in the future. Roofs failing, pipes bursting, whatever. But it's moments like where we are right now, man. We're sitting on your property. This is your domain,
have a fire, make some s'mores.
I was thinking about it. I wanted to have another fire. I'm all for it. Yeah, but that really is the thing. I'll have a few moments the more the better. But laying in my hammock, reading a book, jumping in the pool when it's so hot and being like, how the hell am I this lucky to just have a pool? I can think about how much freaking money it's costing me, but I can also enjoy it too. Which side of the equation would you rather focus on? It's just part of growing up and taking on more responsibility. That discipline is actually a freeing in a lot of ways too.
Another interesting subject matter that I'm sure you'd be interested in talking about is part of buying a home. The nervousness of buying a home for me was, I'm going to be locked down for probably a decade in this place, which is fine, but you also think about travel, you think about getting out there and not necessarily being bound to a place. It felt restrictive at first, and then the more I thought about it, it's actually more freeing in a lot of ways because
absolutely right.
Especially since, I have 2 roommates paying rent. If I ever wanted to go leave for a month to do a photo project, I can potentially rent out my room and make money off my house while I'm out traveling the world. So that was kind of a interesting thing in the process of buying a home. This idea of being bound, but kind of developed into this idea of more so of a freedom and being able to do more things. Also along those same lines, and talking about what you were saying earlier, it being your domain and making it your kind of world. It's like also excited to do landscaping in the spring and really design the house. Like right now, I'm really excited about how the interior is looking. Like I got all these artists.
I was blown away, man. You had that house for what, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe before your party, and we came in. Nice looking spot,
baller.
Man.
Baller
yeah,
pad.
Yeah, it's baller. So that reminds me, I want to re-answer my biggest disappointment question.
Sure.
My biggest disappointment has nothing to do with some of my roommate choices, although that absolutely was one. My biggest one is my YouTube recommended videos have gotten so lame. Because when I was just a merry renter, I was looking up music production techniques and like old school like concert footage and funny things and viral videos that people were sending me, and it was just like always getting these really cool, interesting things. And now it's like how to fix a leaky faucet.
Same with your social media advertised posts. Mine have all gone from like photo gear and clothing to John Deere tractors and walling and paneling and plumbing.
Exactly. So that is the biggest disappointment is your Google AdWords goes to shit.
Yeah. I want more clothing ads. Come on,
right.
Facebook.
Exactly. So that's the biggest disappointment.
Take a little break.
Whew. What an awesome break.
Like 30 seconds.
Yeah, man. So we were chatting about landlord-roommate situations, advice, and whatnot. Jake's just entering the lovely world of being a landlord.
Yes. So
you got anything else for me?
A couple more.
Right on, man.
What do you think some of the first improvements to make on your home would be? Just in general, not specific to having a pool or anything like that. And then seasonally, things to watch out for, especially in Colorado. Obviously, we have hail, lots of snow, all that stuff.
So as far as first improvements on a home, it really is kind of specific. I mean, when you get your inspection, make sure that you pay really close attention because they'll tell you things. And sometimes the seller will fix that for you, and you better believe that you need to double check that work because homeowners are trying to sell it. They're not trying to spend a bunch of money. They're trying to make money, right?
Yep.
So if you need to replace the fence or redo some plumbing or something like that as part of what the inspection recommends, you better double check that work because there's a tendency for them to spend the least amount of money possible on that fix, which could make you responsible for it pretty much immediately after the sale. So I would definitely look back onto what was the most recent upgrades. Chances are that those improvements were made to improve the selling value, but not necessarily to have longevity, right? So whatever was in the inspection, that's definitely something to look out for. Aside from that, there's this excitement that comes from your first home ownership when you're like, oh, I'm going to break down this wall, got to repaint this room, we're going to put a big sectional right here. You see so much. You're so excited. And then the bills start coming in and you realize how expensive home purchases and home improvements can be. And before you know it, you kind of are turning into a more of like a maintenance guy. Like, these are the things that I would like to get to. These are the things that are a bit more pressing in that list. And then there's this budget of things that have to get done. I definitely would love to break down the wall between my kitchen and my living room, redo those floors, and have like a big open space area. I think that would be awesome. But I also know that my water heater needed to be maintained this year. The pipes needed to be descaled, whatever the hell that means. A couple valves needed to be replaced, and that was a huge dent in my budget for a big kind of like wishful home makeover. Mm-hmm. I would itemize it. Like, as you're a homeowner, you look at it, you write, like, first of all, have fun. Just write it all out. Like, I really want to do this with this room. Totally. All the things. Yeah. Then comes the lesser fun part of starting to prioritize them and seeing, like, what needs to be done right now. So for me, the first major investment that I made was in the guest bathroom downstairs because it was extremely dated. It was super ugly. Even the toilet didn't work very well. Seeing as that was going to be the most used bathroom in the house, I knew that I needed to do something with it. So even though it wasn't as flashy as new hardwood floors or whatever, like landscaping, something nice. Like that, now it does. Yeah. Because I redid it. Yeah. So I prioritized a bathroom remake. So the roommates upstairs, they have a bathroom as well, and it's also dated but very functional still. So I haven't yet pulled the trigger on a remodel yet. That'll probably be coming up next. Mm-hmm. I was lucky to have a great design. I love the home as is. There's a few things that I would change if I had the budget for it, but if it's not consistently in the way of your life, if it's not like the kitchen sink doesn't work, you can learn to live with it for a little bit longer than you would expect. So that would be my advice.
So seasonal things to look out for?
Yeah, make sure you detach all of your hoses and get them drained and put somewhere that they're not going to freeze and burst. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself buying hoses. Also, if you leave your hose attached, there's a chance that water could freeze up into your pipes and cause pipe bursting on the inside of the house, especially with those like the garden hose to the outside of the house. That's definitely something to look out for. We both live in houses that are pretty well lived in, so the water flow through the house during the winter is strong enough that you're not worried about pipes bursting. If you lived here by yourself and went away for 2 weeks, you'd probably want someone to come in and maybe like run a load of laundry or take a shower. Like something to keep that water moving is a big deal. It's easy to forget about your gutters until they're overflowing, and when they're overflowing, that can be trouble for your foundation. It can break the gutters. It can damage the roof. So gutter cleanouts.
How often do you do gutter cleanouts?
I do them twice a year. I do them in the spring and I do them in the fall.
They just were done here, so I think I'll wait till the spring.
Yeah, and I have come up with a few different. I used to get up there with gloves and do that, and I still think that might be the most effective way to do it. But I also have used a compressor or a leaf blower and gotten in there and just kind of blasted everything out, which has been a lot more effective than kind of like going inch by inch and just digging things out with your hands. That's something that is easy to forget. Yep. So it's good to set reminders. If you have a power washer or a mower or something that you may keep in a shed that is going to be getting a lot colder than maybe the garage would or something like that, you want to make sure that it's winterized in the correct way. All those motorized devices have different ways of winterizing the engine. So it's usually as simple as cutting a certain fuel line with the valve and then draining out a little bit. It's very simple, but if you don't do it, you could run the risk of breaking apart or not working at all the next year. Landscaping, I'm still learning. I moved into a house that had a lot of landscaping, very nice landscaping, and it's a labor of love for sure. There's a lot of work that goes into keeping the landscaping looking nice, but a big part of it is cutting back a lot of things in the fall and cleaning out the pine needles especially, but also just the dead leaves. Some of the dead leaves will fertilize the yard, but some can kill certain plants that you would want there. And the pine needles, when they're dead, they're very acidic, and that can cause your whole yard to die out if you're sitting under like a pine that's shedding a bunch of old needles. So those are some of the seasonal things that come about. I'm sure there's some more seasoned homeowners that are listening and being like, oh, you guys are missing something crucial. So we will both find out. And if there is, I'll do a follow-up.
Let us know.
The part 2 is how Jake and I fucked up homeownership. Well, cool, man. Yeah, you got any other questions for me?
No, I think that's pretty good. Feeling good about it.
Good, man. You're off to a great start, man.
Oh, thanks, bud. You want to talk photography?
Let's switch it over, man.
Yeah?
I like that.
You said you want to talk some photo stuff.
I do. We're getting a little long in the tooth on this episode. I didn't expect that. I thought it might be a short episode, not a long episode, but I'm not complaining.
Well, you like to talk, so.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely me. Who would have thought I could talk? Start a podcast.
So spit something at me.
All right. Well, first I'll give a little backstory. Jake and I's friendship really kind of took off in early 2017. His sister and I have been friends for a few years, and I had met Jake before, but we never really worked together or hung out as much. And then I don't really remember what kind of kickstarted us hanging out more.
I think it was simply an introduction, and then we just hung out a couple times, and then I think you said you were doing some things. Maybe I don't even know if it was the podcast yet, but I
know it wasn't the podcast because the podcast came out of our friendship.
I know you're interested in photo stuff and things like that, and we just kind of kicked it off in common ground, and I think I probably took you along on a shoot or something at some point, and
definitely
kind of went from there.
So Jake is an awesome photographer, went to school for it, and is actively working in the Denver community and everywhere, really. He's been to Peru, been all over the United States shooting. His portfolio speaks for himself, and he's done so much work for me. I recommend him for any freaking project that you could throw at him. So that is my pitch, first of all. Woo-hoo. But as far as what got us starting a working relationship was we had started a friendship. We were both from Cincinnati, but didn't know each other in Cincinnati. And out here living in Denver had a lot of similarities, so we started shooting the shit. Then he was telling me one day that the Westward, a local magazine, had booked him for a series of video shoots. However, what they were expecting of him was to not only be the cameraman and supply all the microphones and the equipment, but also direct and edit the interviews of these subjects. But not only that, but also conduct the interviews, which seemed to be almost like an impossible job, because how are you supposed to make sure the camera is in focus and the microphones are all working and you're getting the best shot possible while also trying to have a intimate conversation with somebody you've never met before?
I did it a bunch, and it wasn't easy. Like before I met you, I definitely did a fair share of videos like that, and it was always a little more gritty. You know, it was never as good.
Probably a little bit more cookie cutter answers.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly, yeah.
So it's just so hard for you to come up with good follow-ups as an interviewer when you're trying to get them to make the best
about
shot.
1,000 things.
Totally, right. And so Jake was telling me about these issues he was having, and at the time, I had been getting really into podcasts, and I'd also been looking for a new project to take on. And the idea of starting my own podcast was a bit scary, just like any new endeavor. But this seemed like such low-hanging fruit. It just seemed like the universe was giving me an opportunity. So I was like, I'll do it. I'll be the interviewer if that's okay. And it turned out to be a great... Well, we do it for about probably 4 or 5 months. We teamed up and did a bunch of videos for the Westward.
Yeah, it was kind of like focusing it just on individuals in Denver. People made Denver special, so it was really cool to go meet. I mean,
totally diverse too. Coffee shop owners that had been there forever,
activists,
slam poets. Yeah, God, we did
crazy collectors.
Yeah, and I think I have some of those videos on the MindMill website as well. That was really what kicked it off, because not only was I honing my interviewing skills, I was meeting new people in Denver, I was stepping out of my comfort zone, and I was also learning videography and photography in the process. So it was such a really active learning experience that I think just like heightened our friendship, and it kind of kicked off our professional relationship as well. So that being the backstory, now it's been about, I guess, like a year and a half since then. Both of us have made some pretty big strides in our lives since just that long ago. And
it's always weird looking back. You never feel like anything's happening
until you
look back.
Until you think back,
like, wow,
it's been a pretty significant, pretty significant couple of years, man. So Jake has always been my photography teacher. He's quite good at teaching, man. But above all else, just like with any teacher, I think the biggest hurdle you have with a student is convincing them that they need to do their work. I've taught music before and teaching organizational skills, trying to learn photography. It's like you can learn all about aperture and shutter speeds and ISO and anything, but until you get out there and learn your gear and take 200 photos and see what works and what doesn't and look at the shadows, there's nothing else that's going to teach you the same way. So that was
experience, practice.
That was what Jake started me off with. We just went out and started shooting.
Like, go take this thing and go downtown, take some portraits. Tell people you're a famous photographer. They'll believe you.
Yeah, I had to wear tight black pants and thick rimmed glasses.
Yeah, a chain hanging out your pocket.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a few questions. As you are a professional photographer in every sense of the word, yet we live in this world of social media and Instagram celebrities and things like that. So As someone who's been trained, whose business is photography and videography, what are the biggest misconceptions on being a professional in your field?
Well, I'll speak coming from a freelance perspective.
Sure.
Because there are still, I guess, a few staff photographers out there. But from the freelance perspective, I think the toughest thing is doing everything, right? And it has nothing to do with taking a photo. I have confidence in my photographic capabilities. Like, some projects are harder than others, and you got to plan for it a little more. But overall, you gain a level of comfort over time with feeling confidence in yourself and shooting and getting work and things like that. The biggest challenge is consistently all the back end stuff, emailing, finances, your own accountant, your own secretary, marketing, everything. And that's still something I'm trying to figure out. Every photographer is trying to figure out.
And every podcaster too. So.
Yeah, exactly. You freelance.
I freelance pretty much exclusively.
Yeah. So as Seth knows, it's a lot of the back end stuff. People don't get just how much stuff you have to do on a daily basis, from emailing and finances, all that stuff I said. But then you also have to find your work, and people don't really get that. They think people just approach you a lot of the times, which at certain levels they do if you become well known, if you have a certain clientele, niche clientele or whatever. You can get there where people hit you up and you don't have to worry about that. But starting off your career, one of the hardest things has been finding work.
Right.
That's not shooting. That's not editing. Fine with all that stuff.
That's grunt work.
Yeah.
It's putting yourself out there.
Yeah. It's going and introducing yourself to people, taking personal trips for projects. And even personal work is really hard as well, because it's something you always want to do, but finding the time, and like, I guess you always think, well, am I going to get paid for it? Like, as shitty as that sounds, but you got to pay your bills at the end of the day, and you can't always do personal work. You got to get paid a lot of the times too.
Yeah.
So finding clients, really tough. Most people have photographers if they're established business, so you have to convince them why you're better. And then along those same lines, one of the best routes I have found in terms of that is word of mouth, friends.
It always will be that way.
It's really, and it's really just about being a good person. One of the photographers I've trained under and started my career working for, Matt Nager, said you have to be good at two of the three things to be a good photographer. One's business, one's being a good person, and the other's being a good shooter. If you're good at two of the three, you'll probably succeed. Because you can be a good shooter, you can be good at business, but there's some
you're a dirt person,
asshole photographers out there still. But I think the most important of those is being a good person, because when you're a good person, you're yourself, people want to work with you, make them feel comfortable. That's the biggest thing I've learned, is you don't have to try to be somebody else. You just have to be yourself, and people love you or they hate you. And you want to work with the people who love you. You don't want to work with people that hate you. So be yourself. Don't be afraid to go out there and put your neck on the line and introduce yourself to people you're scared about talking to and things like that.
Those literally are your areas for growth, right?
Yeah.
It's when you feel nervous. It's when you've got the little rumble in your stomach of like, this is a big deal. It's like, that's your chance to either possibly step forward in your space and like make a big leap in your life, or retreat back to where you were. I mean, there's obviously risk in approaching that person, but it's not nearly as assuredly going to give you regret like just not doing it.
Also, you have to learn to become comfortable with failure and rejection.
That's, I mean, I feel like both these subjects we're talking about today are so incredibly fundamental to just life in general. We can apply it to being a landlord, to being a roommate, to being a photographer, but it's all about just being a good freaking human. We'll take a quick break. Jake needs to address his
plumbing issues.
His plumbing issues. That sounded like it was code for something. All right, we're back. It's a double break episode, but this time we had good reason. We were talking about home ownership at the beginning of this episode, and then Jake had to take a break because the people who are working on his plumbing were ready for his inspection. Everything work out there?
Brand new water pipes. It feels so good.
Does it? To me, it feels like new tires. It's like all this money and you just keep driving.
It's because you're probably jaded by this point. For me, it's like the first big expense I put on the house. It's something I knew I needed to get done, as I had said earlier. So,
well, good, man.
It was exciting.
Find
it's
joy in
feeling.
it. Find your joy in it.
I did, yeah.
Good. I can't wait to get back and wash my hands with my freshly scaled pipes at my house. It's gonna be like the first time you've ever washed your hands in your life.
Well, I know I'm not drinking rusty water now, which is very.
We call that mineral water. Well, all right. Let's get back on point, because we definitely talked quite a bit about homeownership and roommates. But now let's talk a little bit more about photography. So I wanted to ask you about like social media presence, because it seems like that has just really disrupted the photography industry in a lot of ways, whether it's technology in smartphones and everyone having a camera in their pockets to the abundance of social media and what is gaining traction as opposed to what is kind of getting lost in the ether. How do you feel about the rise of Instagram?
Like you said, it's a combination not only of social media, but new tech. So both of those combined have completely changed the photographic world. But I've always been a part of that world. I never really existed or had my business before social media or before people had smartphones. So I've kind of come into it from the perspective of always needing to adapt, whether that's through new gear, social media tactics, hashtagging, whatever it might be, as well as industry, because industry is changing in photography. And I'm sure this can be compared to a lot of other industries as well. There are very few staff photographers anymore. One of the main things people used to aspire for would be like a newspaper staff photography position, something like that, working for magazines. Now, staff positions are very, very limited. There's not many that exist out there anymore. So you have to find other routes. Commercial and editorial work, which is my passion, and especially editorial, shooting personal work and projects and people that are interesting and I really care to work with and show their face and through portraiture and stuff like that. Love that work, but it's also kind of a dwindling industry. A lot of magazines now, whether it's purchasing stock photography or not paying enough, which is another huge thing. I mean, I don't think there's a magazine in Denver right now that pays what they should. So you have to go look to New York, LA. So come springtime, I'm planning on making a trip to New York, making a trip to LA to make connections with editors, make connections with art directors, producers, and things like that in order to propel my commercial and editorial career to a point where I'm shooting more for national publications and things like that.
Yeah.
Very intimidating thing. Having to, I mean, you pretty much 2 weeks before you go, you send out a bunch of emails to a bunch of magazine editors that you want to shoot for. You feel like your work
aligns
with what they want shot. So you send out a couple of email or a bunch of emails 2 weeks before. Hopefully you get a few responses and you get 5 minutes to sit at somebody's desk and sell them on yourself. Yeah, pretty much. So I'm having a book made or a portfolio made professionally, handmade. Nice. Nice thing that I can bring with me. A lot of people say the physical book or portfolio doesn't even matter anymore, but in my eyes, it's always nice to have that. Photos are meant to be put on paper, good paper. Yeah. That's how you're supposed to view them. Now people are so used to viewing them through a screen that they lose that. So I think there is still something to be said for...
It's an attention thing. If someone hands me a book, you're going to open the book and look at the book.
It's like having a MP3 recording versus a record. Yeah. It's the same thing.
If someone sends me... If you sent me your deck on a PDF, it's like, yes, that's technologically like the way that we do it now. Yeah. However... it doesn't grab my attention. Like I may start looking at it and then I'll get a notification and then I'll be off to the races in some other world on my phone. You know what I mean? So I think that there is something about the permanency and the singularity of having something in print.
Yeah, and also having like a leave behind, right? So when you're leaving their office, you hand them a print or you hand them promo material or something. Sure. I think it's really important. I think a lot of people don't think it's important. Like I've been told, buy an iPad and get a nice case with your logo embedded in it. And that's a good thing to do too, but for some reason I'll have that iPad and I'll have my website pulled up, but I'm also want to be able to put a portfolio on their desk, make it official.
Totally.
So adapting, that's part of it. These meetings, right? Because there's no staff positions anymore, so now I have to just go out there, meet these guys, and hope they like my work and our tastes align, and that they want to hire me maybe a couple of times a year to shoot a big project. Or a small project, whatever. So it's a lot of outreach like we talked about before. In terms of social media, I was kind of born into that, right? It's like my generation's thing. While I've had my business, it's always been there. So it kind of comes second nature to me. I mean, honestly, I haven't made an Instagram post in about a month. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of the work I've been shooting recently hasn't been something I wanted to post. I've been making a lot of money, shooting a lot of things, and things have been good, but haven't been necessarily shooting things I want to show off. which happens. You go through these lulls and these waves, and this winter I'm planning some personal projects because I know the wedding season will slow down and things like that. And so I do have 2 businesses, if I didn't clarify that earlier. I have my editorial and commercial, and then I have a wedding.
I was going to lob you up to pitch your stuff at the end of the show.
Yeah,
but we can do it right now.
Well, just a little clarification in terms of
Jake Holschuh Photography, which is pretty much anything Jake decides is interesting, which is cool because he has good taste. And then there's White Bison.
Yep. White Bison Weddings. Yep.
Yeah.
So social media, it's huge though still. I mean, and it will be probably for the rest of our lives. You have to post regularly. You have to hashtag. You have to like other people's posts. You have to be proactive. I mean, you're going to hear the same stuff over and over and over again. And as much as you hate it, as much as you don't want to do it, it's a necessary evil. And I think the biggest struggle with me in terms of social media is not posting. It's not hashtagging. It's self-confidence. It's so easy to compare yourself to others. I mean, my Instagram is made up of 95% photographers. So I'm on a daily basis seeing people's stories.
You're posting your best
posts
work
about them,
which
in
you would
Hawaii.
you'd be totally proud of your best work because
Yeah.
it's a great shot, edited phenomenally. It's pristine.
Yeah.
And then the first thing you see on your feed is somebody who's been in the game for 40 years who has 3 million followers. You know what I mean?
This
Like
gorgeous model in Antarctica.
right, right, exactly. Poor model.
Yeah. In a bathing suit. So yeah, I mean, it's really had to teach myself to not put myself down.
That's just social media in general. No matter what you're interested in, you're naturally going to be pulled towards the top performers in whatever field it is.
And when
you just have to realize that, once again, like look at yourself as a photographer and as a businessman in 2017 when we first met, and look at yourself now. Now you've got 2 established companies. You're shooting regularly. You're busy with work. Like I would imagine you're probably getting to the point where you're needing to say no to offers that aren't correct.
Sometimes.
Well,
I wish it was more.
I will assure you that is coming your way. At least to the point where you're like, I don't need this headache, right? This doesn't fit with what I want to do. It doesn't matter if it's some money. It's not the right type of money. It's not worth the headache. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that'll be a really good turning point, I'm sure. But it's just so easy to fall into that. And it's kind of like just like a healthy relationship. It's kind of like with food. It's like you need healthy food to survive, but you can't be a glutton and eat junk food either. It's like you need to feed the Instagram beast. You're a photographer. You need to like continue to grow your following and contribute. However, you don't want to be just a total addict. You don't want to be on their site all the time, which not only is just can be a colossal waste of time and completely unproductive, but also has such a drain on your emotional integrity, like your self-image, when you spend so much time in that ether. Right.
For me, it was kind of a simple fix. It wasn't, and I'm still struggling with it. A simple fix, I mean, it was like something I simply needed to do, not necessarily easy to do.
Yeah, simple is not easy.
But it's really just, rather than seeing those things and getting down on myself and being like, oh, like I wish I was there, I've tried to gain the perspective of looking at those things and be like, that's awesome. I'm going to do that one day. And telling myself that that's just where I'm going to be. And if I keep working, like I'll get there. So I think a lot of it is just perspective. It's being present with where you're at and knowing that if you work hard, you can get those things. Yeah. I mean, I still struggle with it on a daily basis. So I still wake up, check my feed and see the things that I want to be doing that I'm not doing and struggle with that. And I think anybody in my position would have that same feeling.
Especially with photography, with Instagram and photography. You know, it's just that's what it is, you know?
Yeah.
So I see it. On the flip side, you've made it through education. You've got a successful business. What advice would you give to young photographers, whether or not they're using an iPhone or a DSL, whatever it is? What advice do you give to the up-and-comers as to everything from lighting to attitude, working with your subjects? What's your good building blocks?
I mean, I'm drawn to say like avoiding that negativity and keep trucking and things like that, which are obvious things, and I don't want to be that cheeseball. I would say the biggest thing that helped me was finding photographers at the beginning of my career that I connected with through their work, and then approaching those people and seeing if I could help. Not even asking for a dime, right? Just being like, hey, I want to learn, because they're going to pay you. You're going to get paid as an assistant. You'll make your money, whatever.
Yep.
But people want to know you care. I always try to like I said, find a connection with that person in some way that's valuable. For example, Matt, some of the things he shot, I really vibed with, who I talked about before, Matt Nager, first dude I started working with in terms of big shoots and stuff like that. And then recently I started working with another photographer, Brent Taylor, who does product work. I'm not necessarily much of a product photographer, but I knew I could learn a lot from him in terms of studio work and lighting. And I also found that he was from Cincinnati. So when I sent him an email, I was like,
nice.
hey, man.
Always nice to have a connection like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You're from Cincy. I'm from Cincy. Let's get a beer. Let's
get some Skyline.
Yeah, exactly. So finding a common ground, and not only that person, but also their work that you can latch on to. And most people will say no, that usually if a photographer is already successful, they probably have an assistant that they work with. Both of my situations, it's good timing. And Matt had just dropped his assistant. Same with Brent. I ended up emailing them and finding that connection, and it worked out. So
awesome.
I would say number one thing as a photographer starting your career is you got to shoot, obviously. You got to keep shooting and do personal work, because your personal work is what's going to get you gigs in the long run.
You got to love what you're doing, man.
Yeah.
You got to love that shot you took.
Well, with personal work as well, editors, people, business owners, whoever that thinking about hiring you, they look at that work because they want to find that same connection we were just talking about. And until you do personal work, until you really get out there in the field and put yourself out there and create things you care about, people won't care about your work. If you're sitting there like trying to take a good picture of this beer can in your living room, that's great and all, and it could be a good shot, but you're not necessarily advancing your career in any way, unless I guess you want to be a product photographer. But passion for those personal projects is really important in my eyes, and finding a photographer that you can learn from.
Just like finding a mentor, right?
Yeah,
someone
exactly.
that you look up to, someone that has been down that road, can not take the steps for you, but it can at least explain the steps that they took. Right?
I have this really weird thing where I always call them boss.
You call them boss?
Yeah, like just as like a respect almost thing, right? And like,
do you call it to them, or do you like refer to them as your boss?
Well, like I don't refer to them as my boss, but I call them like boss man. Like when I'm working with them, and it may be stupid, but I actually find like some kind of like value in it, because I think it shows them that, yeah, like I'm here to learn from you. And that's what most of these photographers want out of an assistant. They want somebody that will learn from them and value what they have to teach you, and as well as be a hard worker and not just be a money whore.
Were you brought up to say like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am?
To a certain extent, not in like a military setting or anything like that.
My mother was all about manners, and so I tend to use that a lot too, to the point where like I'll say it till just like I've gotten reprimanded. Like some like female friends, they don't really like being like, well, I'm like, yes, ma'am. Like, yes, ma'am. They're like, whoa, like
you say that to old ladies.
Yeah, somehow they don't like that, and I'm like, that's just what my mom told me to do, to be respectful.
When I was bartending too. The same thing. Like, why are you calling these people ma'am?
Yeah. But I like the boss man. I mean, just like anything, it's like, you know,
it's showing respect.
Saying it is like, yeah, boss, like absolutely, and being like, whatever, boss. There's obviously there's a meaning behind it. You're saying it as in a term of respect. That's great. I mean,
I'm waiting for the day that I have an assistant and they call me boss man.
But you can't ask for it.
Yeah, I can't ask for it.
Can't.
That'll just be the day I know I've made it.
You can call me Mr. Boss Holschuh.
We all have my roommates call me boss.
Yeah, see how good that works. That's great dynamic. Dude, this was awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I love how the concepts of this podcast is it can kind of go anywhere, and I loved just having a little hangout to talk about roommate shit turned into, why don't we just record it and see where it takes us? It was awesome.
Yeah.
Got a little glimpse into the world of Jake Holschuh, as well as hopefully a little bit of insight and maybe a little bit of help on how to navigate living with people, which is not easy no matter what your situation is.
Nope, it's not. Yeah. Well, thank you, Seth. I appreciate you having me on.
Sure thing, boss man. Is that the first time?
I call you boss man.
I don't want you to call it. I was a gift. It was a gift to you.
But it doesn't.
I gave you a boss man.
Yeah, it's out of.
Are we going to end this podcast talking shit? Because I am.
It would only be right.
Because we've been very, very cordial with each other this entire time. Well, but
end it with an I love you. And thank you.
All right, sack of shit, Jake Holschuh. Guest. All right.
Great guy, Seth Marcus. Listen to his podcast.
All right. Awesome. That's how we end it. See you later, guys. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the Mindful Millennial Podcast. If you loved this episode, check out some of the other MindMill episodes. They're all free and available at themindmill.com and on all the major podcast platforms. Also, please take a second and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's incredibly easy, and it really is the best way to help the show. Stay tuned for more MindMill episodes coming down the line. I'll keep them interesting for you, I promise. Take it easy.